So looks like I have everybody here, so I'm excited about that. So we'll start that. Let me see if I can find this, this YouTube video.
Our problem is that the new American dilemma isn't so simple. We have all of these markers by which we can demonstrate that we're not the people we used to be. But we don't know the ways in which we're not such good people because that part is unconscious. You may think this about yourself, but is that really who you are? We actually created a test that measures bias. You see words that capture good and bad. You have to associate Yankees with good and Red Sox with bad. This is very easy for a Yankee fan. But when you tell them to associate Yankee with bad and Red Sox with good, that's an impossible thing for them to do. They can't do it. They'll make mistakes. They'll take a lot longer to do it, and so on. Take a test like this and now just replace Red Sox and Yankees with the groups black and white. Imagine that for half the trials on this test, you have to associate black with good whenever you see a black face or a word like love, peace, joy, friend, all these good things. And while you're doing that, you have to put white and bad together. And words that mean terrible things in the world. Words like agony, devil, bomb, vomit. How hard is that for you to do, is the question. We're not talking about your conscious attitudes. We're not talking about your conscious beliefs. We're talking about something that you yourself may not necessarily know you have. For something like 75% of white Americans, it's very hard to put black and good together.
Our no call is like any other.
Drop that jacket right now!
During a chaotic situation or an arrest, police officers have to be ready for anything and be able to react.
Imagine the most stressful day you've ever had in your life and multiply it by about 1 million.
It is a life or death situation Todd Brown knows well. He's vice president of TI training in Golden.
Freeze, please don't move!
It develops shoot or don't shoot simulators used by police departments across the country.
So when you press a trigger, it's going to recoil like a real gun.
To see what officers go through every day, Brown put me through 2 simulations. Let me see your ID. The first, interviewing a man who looks like someone who's wanted for questioning. His uneasy nature enough to make me want to draw my weapon.
Every time a police officer makes contact with somebody, they don't know that person. Okay? So everything they do is try to err on the side of safety.
Now I'm responding to a warehouse break-in. In the dark, I encounter a man after hearing someone call for help.
Send me both of your hands.
I fire after the man suddenly pulls out what I think is a gun. Turns out it was only a staple gun.
That's just a small example of a compressed time frame, adverse lighting condition, where you had to make that split-second decision.
Now look at the same simulation, only this time the man does have a gun. How would you react?
No room for lack of vigilance, and certainly these guys display it on a daily basis.
We have a
Some
winner.
really tough decisions that Todd Brown said, even though things
thank you.
seem to have been going along quickly in those simulators out in the real world. He says things happen even faster. Now, we did check and found that police officers do have to go through this shoot, don't shoot training very often. In Denver, we found that officers have to go through gun training.
He is one of the most outspoken critics of police use of force here in the Valley. But he gets some on-the-job training about use of force tonight.
Very interesting stuff. Reverend Jared Bauman led protests and marches after Phoenix police shot and killed an unarmed man. Well, tonight, he gets a chance to experience the split-second decisions that police have to make when encountering a suspect.
And our Troy Hayden was right along with him tonight, getting the training as well. This must have been eye-opening.
Hey, what? It's a really interesting experience. And we've all watched these protests all over the country. Police officers are accused of shooting people who aren't armed. But what would happen if one of those protesters felt what it's like to wear a badge and then be put in a life or death situation himself? So I'm going to have you put the holster on right inside your belly. Jared Maupin gets his weapon. You might recognize him as a high-profile organizer in the minority community. Just last month, he led marches on Phoenix Police headquarters after an officer shot an unarmed man.
Hey, Meg, how are you?
Today, he accepted an invitation to look at things from the other side. agreeing to go through a forced-unforced training session with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. 3 scenarios where you have to decide to shoot or not shoot. Scenario 1 is a call about a man casing cars in a parking lot. Often approaches the man and starts asking questions. What? You're looking for your vehicle. What kind of car do you drive? You're getting your phone. What kind of car do you drive? It's my car, man. Often, the officer is shocked. It happens that fast.
At what time did you think that it was time for you to address the use of force that was
When he came to the back of the vehicle and was hiding, I could sense something was wrong. Scenario 2, a call of 2 men fighting. What's going on today, gentlemen? What's going on today, gentlemen? What do you want? What's happening here? What's happening here? What are you doing, man? Hey, you should have approached me. You should have approached me. We were just arguing about what happened in there. Yeah. What are you doing? You just shot him? Hey, he rushed me. Tell me why you shot him. Well, I shot because he was within that zone. I felt there was an imminent threat. I didn't necessarily see him armed, but he came clearly to do some harm to the officer, to my person. It's hard to make that call. It shakes you up. Again, an unarmed man was shot. Scenario 3, a call about a possible burglar walking down the street. Moffat gets him on the ground. He's not complying. I need you to keep your hands up, sir. For what? Because I need to check that waistband. For what? What are you doing? I don't know what you have on this. Everybody, look at this guy. What are you doing? No shots fired. But the suspect did have a hidden knife in his waistband. I went through the scenarios too, without seeing what Moffat did. Oh, do you have keys or do you have anything to show me that? Well, I need to talk to you. Come on over here. I'm dead. Maricopa County Sheriffs, get on the ground. Get on the ground. Both of you, get on the ground. Get on the ground. Get back. Same results for both of us. Things happen very fast out here. I asked Moffat what his biggest takeaway from this exercise will be. I didn't understand how important compliance was, but after going through this, yeah, my attitude has changed. And this is all unfolding in 10 to 15 seconds. People need to comply with the orders of law enforcement officers for their own sake. It's the Compliance Sheriff's Office for taking us through that today. It was an eye-opener. That's a tremendous admission that Reverend Moffat just made, right? You need to comply for your own safety. Right, and he saw it. I mean, he plainly shot a man who was not armed, but was coming at him, and he felt, that he was unsafe at that point. He was coming after him, and he fired.
Yeah, I don't think any officer goes into work thinking, I'm going to kill somebody today. But these interesting things happen. Like the guy coming from behind the SUV, boom,
and you are. How did you feel about those scenarios when you were going through them? Did it change your perspective? Yeah, I've been through this before about 4 or 5 years ago, but it reinforced how fast things happen. And you think, at the time, I can think through this, and I can figure this all out. No, it's boom. It's just there. It's that fast.
Well, I respect them all for going through that.
Yeah, I agree too.
And agreeing to go through that and seeing it from the other side. So.
Do you think it changes the way he approaches these issues going forward? He says he's going to go out in the community and say what he said at the very end there. You have to comply with what police officers tell you. Let everything sort out at the end, but just do what they tell you right then and sort things out afterwards. Good stuff. Thank you.
There's this thing called the Black Lives Matter movement, or kind of the social awakening of the importance of Black lives, and particularly in the face of police brutality and those kinds of things. Why do you think now is the time that we're having these conversations as opposed to 5 years ago or 10 years ago, when the same things that are happening now were also happening then? So what do you think makes this particular time in history different?
Social media helps us use small voices that are in small areas that are oppressed by government, small communities that are oppressed by the government in that community, whether the government is the police department or the mayor's office or a combination. They can say this isn't fair, but they're a small whisper in the entire nation. And people can't come and hear and see what's going on there, so they just remain a small whisper, which has happened in the past. But in social media, they can put their story, a real story out there. People say, hey, that's not right. And they come from everywhere to say, hey, that's not right. And it makes change. So social media has really been an ally to shining a light on that, the negative, really negative things that have happened, and say, so the entire nation can say, hey, no, that's not right. Even if you've never seen it or experienced it in your own life, you can say, hey, that's not right. And we get a lot more people saying that's not right, so it needs to be changed. Real change needs to come. It needs to come now. So social media has been a really big ally to really saying, yes, Black Lives Matter, because look what's happening. Media has really given a louder voice to the whispers of communities that have been oppressed, especially the communities that are very oppressed. You can have larger communities and they'll say that's not right, and there's still police brutality, but it's not as outright, it's not as often, it's not like it is in Ferguson, where they can come in and they can say so many different ways where the police department was racist, and where they had many racist, laws or rules, but the unwritten rules that they can see over and over and over again. There's some communities where you're not going to see it that obvious, but in Ferguson it was so obvious. The community knew it, the police department knew it, but nothing was changing because they were so oppressed by that police department that they just came out as whispers and nobody could hear them calling for help until social media.
And here's a who. On the 15th of May, in the heat of the day, splashing, enjoying the jungle's great joys, Horton the elephant heard a small noise. He looked toward the sound.
There's no one around. I heard a faint yelp, like someone calling for help. I'll help you,
said Horton.
But who are you? Where?
He looked and he looked. He could see nothing there, but a small speck of dust blowing through the air.
I've never heard tell of a small speck of dust able to yell. Why, I think that there must be something on top of that small speck of dust. A creature of very small size, too small to be seen by an elephant's eyes. I'll just have to save him, because after all, a person's a person no matter how small.
Using the greatest of care, stretching his trunk through the air, he lifted the dust speck and carried it over, placing it down safe on a very soft clover. Hoofed a voice. 'Twas a sour kangaroo, and the young kangaroo in her pouch said, too. A person on that? Why, there never has been.
Believe me,
said Horton.
I tell you sincerely, I heard him quite clearly. I know there's a person down there. What's more, quite likely there may even be four, maybe a family for all that I know, with tiny children starting to grow. Please, as a big favor to me, don't disturb them, just let them be.
I think you're a fool, laughed the sour kangaroo, and the young kangaroo agreed, saying, me too. They plunged into the pool, splashing, and Horton the elephant came dashing.
I can't let these small persons drown,
he said with a frown.
I've got to protect them. I'm bigger than they.
So he plucked up the clover and hustled away. Then Horton stopped walking. The speck started talking. He could barely hear it. Then he put his ear near it.
My friend,
came the voice.
You're a very fine friend. You've helped all us folks on this dust speck no end. You've saved all our houses, our ceiling and floors. You've saved all our churches and grocery stores.
You mean
Horton gasped.
You have buildings there too?
Oh yes,
piped the voice.
We most certainly do. I know,
called the voice.
I'm too small to be seen, but I'm mayor of a town that is friendly and clean. Our buildings to you would seem terribly small, but to us who aren't big, they are wonderfully tall. My town is called Hoovin, and I have a Hoo, and we Hoos are thankful and grateful to you.
And Horton called back to the mayor of the town.
You're safe now, don't worry. I won't let you down. After all, because a person's a person, no matter how small.
You've run wild and insisted on chatting with persons who've never existed. I'm here to say,
snapped the big kangaroo,
that your silly game is totally through.
And the young kangaroo joined in.
Me too.
With the little sham who I've engaged, you're going to be roped and you're going to be caged. As for your disrespect, that you shall boil like a hot steaming kettle of hazelnut oil.
Boil it?
Gasped Horton.
Oh, that you can't do. It's all full of persons. They'll prove it to you. Mr. Mayor, you must prove you are there. Get every who out. Holler and shout. If you don't, every who will end up in the stew.
Down on the dust speck, the scared little mare called a great meeting in the Whoville town square, and his people cried loudly. They cried out in fear. The elephant smiled.
That was clear as a bell. You kangaroos heard that very well.
We heard no small voices, and you didn't either.
And the young kangaroo in her pouch said,
Me neither.
Grab him!
they shouted,
Cage the big dope! Wrap him up with miles of rope! Don't let him loose! Dunk that snapping hazelnut juice!
Fortune fought back with vigor and vim, but the Wickersham gang was too many for him. To the mayor he called.
Don't give up. I believe in you all. A person's a person, no matter how small. You very small persons will not have to die if you make yourselves heard. So come on and try.
The mayor grabbed a tom-tom. He started to smack it, and all over Whoville they whipped up a racket. It rang through the air and shook the whole sky, and the mayor called through the hula balloon.
Fortune, is our sound coming through?
Fortune called back.
I hear you fine, but the kangaroo's ears aren't strong like mine. Are you sure every who down in Whoville is working? Quick, look, is anyone shirking?
Through the town rushed the mayor from the east to the west, but everyone seemed to be doing his best. It wasn't enough, all this ruckus and roar. He had to find someone to help him make more. Just as he felt he was getting nowhere, almost about to give up in despair, he burst through a door. That mayor discovered a shirker hidden away in Fairfax Apartments. Apartment 12J, a very small shirker named Jojo, just standing and bouncing a yo-yo, not making a sound, not a yip, not a chirp. The mayor rushed inside and grabbed the young twerp. He climbed with the lad up the Eiffel Tower.
This
Cried the mayor,
is your town's darkest hour. The time for all who's who have blood that is red to come to the aid of their country.
he said.
We've got to make noise in greater amounts. So open your mouth, lad, for every voice counts.
When they got to the top, the lad cleared his voice and he shouted out. And that yop, that one small extra yop put it over. From that speck on that clover, their voices were heard. They rang out clean. Horton smiled.
Do you see what I mean? They proved they are persons, no matter how small. And their whole world was saved by the smallest of all.
How true! Yes, how true!
Said the big kangaroo.
And from now on, you know what I'm planning to do. From now on, I'm going to protect them with you.
And the young kangaroo said,
Me too.
I'm not sure what's happening with all the other folks on the piece, but there are a couple of videos that I wanted to share with folks, and so I put them in the group chat on the left. So we've been on for about 20 minutes or so. I haven't seen any of the other folks show up, so I'm not sure if they found the link or if that was working for them or how that was going. So yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with the system. It's the first time, so thank you so much for bearing with us. And I will put these, I'll put the videos in this chat room as well. So I'm currently going through 2 chat rooms just to make sure that folks are covered. And when we talk about this idea of Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, the crux of the conversation is really quite simple. First of all, we cannot experience other people's experiences, so to tell them that their experience is invalid is difficult to suggest at best. So there's that point. The second point being that not only can we not fully exist in another person's perspective or paradigm, we have to work in ways that actually present opportunities for them to be whole, complete people. And that too is something that hasn't necessarily been happening, particularly when we talk about American history and how those things have played out. So those are some things to consider. One of the things that is really interesting about the United States is that even if I don't necessarily agree with the actions that people undertake, when they are in the best interest of upholding the Constitution of the United States, I have to support those things. And so when we look at what types of things have systemically happened in the United States, particularly as it relates to kind of Black Lives Matter and the things that have happened to Black people in the United States, we'd be hard pressed not to really spend some time talking about why people would even say Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. And I think it's also interesting, there are lots of interesting things, is that when we talk about this idea of Black lives, people immediately believe, and it's interesting, whenever we say anything about Black people in particular, it causes people to have some visceral responses and reactions. And so All Lives Matter really didn't come into a movement or an identity until people started saying that Black Lives Matter. And I find it interesting that I got a call from a conference, and they wanted me to change the title of one of my presentations because they thought it was too provocative. Now, here's a little background for that. I gave them, I submitted 5 proposals with similar, so certainly different subjects, but similar approaches. And so, so they out of the 5 that I submitted, they elected to do 2. And so now I just got a call, and the conference is in a few weeks, and I just got this email over this. I had this phone conversation where they want to change one of the titles, and what they want to change, the title they want to change, is a workshop that I do called "Black People Are Racist Too." And I find it interesting that even in doing a workshop, when we try to talk specifically about blackness or Black lives, people really get hyper defensive and say that the conversation is divisive. And I'm not asking to do anything, right? I'm not asking folks to change anything, but I'm asking to have a conversation. And just the mentioning of this idea of blackness or Black lives produces such a visceral response that it's really important to recognize. It's also important to recognize that oftentimes when people hear other folks talk about this idea or this concept even of, issues for a Black life, that it means that it's exclusive of other folks. And so I find it interesting because when we don't talk about Black lives and we don't talk about Native lives, if we don't call them, they get lost in the shuffle. And if we don't name something, if we, for example, and I'm not an oncologist, so this is a very crude example, so please excuse my crudeness, but hopefully you can get the point. So, it would be the difference between really having a headache and then having a headache because I have a tumor or I have something that's going on with my body physically. And so, if we don't pinpoint it, if we don't call it, if we don't figure out how to really get to it, then, our treatment won't be as effective as it could be. And so, and then people ask questions like, why do Black Lives Matter events interrupt social gatherings? So You know, there were some things about a threat to the fair, or a threat to a race that was going to be run in the Twin Cities, a threat to shopping experiences in different places. And what I'd like to suggest to you, which I thought was really interesting, and I'll go back to this because this scenario has played itself out, is that you know, one evening at the Bloomington City Council, and I think it was January, actually it's probably about a year ago this week or so, and they honored Martin Luther King holiday with a proclamation. So they made this big proclamation, and they were very proud that they were willing to and could support Dr. King in his efforts to do nonviolent social change. While at that same event, the council was meeting on what types of charges to charge Black Lives Matter folks with. And the interesting thing about it was the juxtaposition of the celebration of Dr. King and his nonviolent movement, but obviously they didn't understand what that meant. And so I would encourage you to read. As a matter of fact, I'm going to look it up and put it in the chat room. But look up the letter from a Birmingham jail, and you would be surprised that it reads like a playbook of what things are happening now in our society, right? So it is true that all lives matter and that all lives are important. It is also true that for social change to occur, people have to be uncomfortable. And I would say that particularly with the Civil Rights March, that was an ugly time. We've really romanced what that looked like or what that must have felt like because we haven't had to go through it. But now I look up and we're going through the same thing now. And so the feelings of resentment or the feelings of being put off are the same kinds of feelings that the people who have been victimized by a number of these social ills have felt for a long time. You know, I'm in my favorite shopping place and I can't go get my latte. Well, I think that's interesting because I know that my grandparents couldn't buy a house in certain neighborhoods, and so they were inconvenienced, so to speak, right? But on a very profound level, because buying a house means that you can get equity, it means you can build a nest egg, a platform for your kids and your grandkids. You can build a legacy. Buying a latte means that you can buy a latte. So I don't know that people necessarily see. Yeah, and people say, well, there have been some events where people like missed their flights or they've been blah, blah, blah. But I want you to think about, interstate travel for Black folks was problematic. Not being able to go to the restrooms, not being able to go into restaurants, having to go to the back of hotels, having to go to the back of restaurants. I mean, so the inconvenience that we're feeling now is very similar to the inconvenience that actually got us to a place where we can even have these kinds of conversations on somewhat of an even footing. And so there's that. And then when we talk about the prison industrial complex and we talk about all those things, and it's absolutely right. I would say that one life is not any more worthy of another life, but we could also look at statistics, and statistics demonstrate to us that there are some profound ways in which Native American Indians, Native Americans, and Blacks, Black people, African Americans, if you will, have been working through some really tough and treacherous waters. And so look at the Emancipation Proclamation, 1863. The slaves get free without a plan, right? So you have generations of people. I mean, almost a century of people in the system, and then you let them free and there's no plan. And then there are these and it was very interesting that even in the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States that outlaws slavery, there is a but clause in there. And it says, except, so the 13th Amendment says that we'll have no indentured servitude, we will have no slavery, except where people have been convicted of a crime. And, to be quite honest, that becomes the introduction, that is beckoning, that is begging for institutions and governments to find a new way to get these slaves under control. And I find it interesting, if you've never seen The Birth of a Nation, it is, by today's standards, not very compelling, but yet it is very compelling. And so The Birth of the Nation becomes the preeminent modus operandi. How people operate becomes the preeminent way in which people see Black people, and they don't see them as full humans. They see them as barbaric, half people, half animal. They don't see them as a full person with a soul. And so when we hear these cries for this idea of Black Lives Matter, and I don't know if you heard the piece that I played before when we started at 4 o'clock, but the piece, Horton hears a who. Horton hears a who, right? So we read those fairy tales, or in that case, I guess, parable or parable or fable or whatever. We read those without thinking about the actual consequences or the actual benefits of what these things mean. And so that book, the story, Horton Hears a Who, Horton is an elephant and he hears something on a small speck of dust. And so he investigates, and what he finds is that there's a whole town on this thing, but no one can hear them until Horton draws attention to that. And so when we talk about, Black Lives Matter, these things have been going on for such a long time that and folks haven't felt heard. And so this is their opportunity. And so it's somewhat disingenuous to really not develop those thoughts in a way to actually get us to some change. So those are some thoughts that I've had around this idea of Black Lives Matter and versus All Lives Matter. And I want to tell you that the choices that officers are making in a number of these things are very difficult to make. These are some tough decisions that they're making. Unfortunately, what we know is, as statistics, in statistics, the more opportunities you have for these things, the more likely you have for things to happen. And so if you have communities that are over-policed, and over-policed means that the stops and frequency in that area are higher than other areas, and you have this proportional crime kind of stuff, and it's really interesting, and I'll put this out here, that people see whatever you're looking for, you'll find. Whatever question you ask is the question that gets answered. And so when we talk about this idea of crime and over policing, and I have to say there's some police chiefs that I really admire because they've taken a different position, or they've continued a tradition of community policing. And so the chief in Columbia Heights is a really great guy and really works to build relationships in the community. Chief Blair Anderson in St. Cloud is a really great guy, and he's working to build relationships in the community. And so, and even the sheriff of Anoka County James Stewart is really working to try to be a community-oriented policing agency, and so those jobs are tough. And I have a video that is also in the chat room that you can look at that talks about some of those challenges of what does it mean to be a police officer in these high-stake traffic stops or interventions, and so those things are also important. So those are a couple of things that I've dealt with, and I want to say that if we're not in a position to recognize people's humanity, then we're typically not in a position to A, be helpful to them, but B, be helpful to ourselves, because we'll constantly see other people as the other, as opposed to seeing that their motivations are very similar to my own. Now, this is what I will say to critics or people who say, well, those Muslims, they don't have the same goals that we have. They don't have the same stuff that we get. And I'll say, because it's interesting rhetoric, because I've heard that about other groups as well, right? So I remember reading an article where Benjamin Franklin was saying that about Germans, where, we've said that about Hispanics or Latinos, and in some cases we still say that, right? Those things have been said about Black people, and in some situations they're still being said. Some of those things have been said about Native Americans, and in some ways they're still being said. The Irish and the Italians seem to have figured out a way to at least be closer to getting all of the benefits that their racial status of white has earned them. But I want to say that human beings have similar motivations. And what makes the motivations different, or what makes those things not exactly the same, is the context by which they were developed, and the context by which they have to relate it. And so the context becomes extremely important. And if we don't understand the context, then we certainly don't understand the people, right? If I don't understand the context of why people are suggesting that Black Lives Matter, then I certainly won't understand their behavior. If I don't understand the context of the people who say all lives matter, then I certainly won't understand their people. And so how do we get to a place where we can get to this understanding? We have to have conversations. We have to engage in critical conversations. Now, this is what I will offer you about critical conversations. And, due to the time, and we'll try to rebroadcast this and see if folks are interested, and I'll send this out. But the thing that's very interesting is that first of all, let's talk about this idea of conflict, right? So our first response to conflict, and we only have one response to conflict. Now, I was taught that there are three, right? Fight, flight, and flee, or freeze, right? I think that those are the three. So fight, flight, or freeze. And what I like to offer is that there's only really one, and that the other two serve the interest of the one. And so whenever we're in conflict, our natural tendency is to want to flee, to get out of that situation, that uncomfortable situation. And we'll do one of two things to do that. We'll either fight or we will flee, right? So those two things serve the first purpose, which is to get away. So when we're uncomfortable, we have to overcome our natural, innate, and I won't say instinct, because I don't think people have instincts, but our natural, innate feeling that we need to vacate or leave a situation, which actually creates more of what we're trying to diminish, particularly when we're dealing with human relations, right? And so human beings we're really motivated by similar things, but the context by which we grow up help to create the framework of how we see the world. And I would submit that that the Muslim, the Christian, the Jew, if we want to go that way, right, or the Black, the Hispanic, the white, the upper class, middle class, lower class, however we want to cut this thing apart, I would say at the core are the same motivations or similar motivations: safety, significance, and belonging. Safety, significance, and belonging. And what is problematic is typically that those methods come in conflict with other people's methods. And so if our primal instinct, when in conflict, is to run away, we have to use our prefrontal cortex. It developed for a reason, for cognitive, creative problem solving. And so if running away is our natural tendency, then we have to figure out ways to lean in, not run away, but lean in to help solve problems by engaging in dialogue with folks. It is absolutely amazing what having a conversation with someone that you think you have a disagreement with does for you when you're able to hear that they're looking for safety, significance, and belonging. And so when we talk about Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, the funny thing is I think that they're in a particular place where they can't hear each other, but what they need to recognize is that they have similar goals and outcomes. So with that, it looks like no one has questions in the chat room. So I will, I'll leave that at that. And I look forward to seeing you at our next hot topic. We will replay this so that folks can have a chance to watch that. And I look forward to seeing who you become. Till next time, this is Andre Cohen. Have a great day.